Do you feel guilty of pleasing yourself? Posted on October 14th, 2011. At the heart of every person who is not aligned with himself or herself, and thus has issues of low self-esteem or low confidence, is the thought pattern of guilt about aligning with their joy. Feeling guilty about being oriented towards one's joy or pleasure is at the root of all inner conflicts and misalignments. It's so common to find people who are focused all the time on catering to someone else's approval instead of having the courage to line up with their own joy. People who try to please others while denying their own interests may try to justify their behavior by labeling themselves as being selfless, but that's just a cloak of denial they're hiding under, when in truth, they're just lacking the courage and understanding to align with themselves. If you feel guilty about pleasing yourself, it's a given that your present reality is not one of joy or abundance, but one of struggle, lack, neediness, and conflict. This is not a guess, but a fact, because law of attraction can only respond to your inner vibration, and a person who feels guilty about orienting with their joy is always vibrating in lack or fear. Sacrificing your joy is not a noble way of life. It seems like our society panders to the notion of being selfless enough to sacrifice our joy for the sake of others. They deem such behavior as noble or elevated. But if you really look within, you will notice that such a behavior reeks of a disconnected way of living, where you're going against the natural movement of your mind, which is always towards its own well-being and joy, to give others pleasure or to make someone else feel good. It's one thing to help others because it brings us joy, and it's totally a different thing to help others while sacrificing our joy. You need to be authentic and honest within yourself to know if your behavior is tuned towards your joy or towards a disconnection with your joy. Whether you like it or not, the natural makeup of your mind is wired to selfishly look out for its joy. If it was not selfishly oriented, it would stop making an effort to survive. It would stop seeking to eat or breathe or procreate. It's only because of its selfish orientation to want to survive and enjoy itself that keeps the body together. People seem to find the word selfish extremely negative, but if you look realistically, you will notice that each cell in your body is selfish, or else it would stop seeking nourishment for itself, and it would stop wanting to thrive or survive. The reason why people find the word selfish as being negative is because they immediately assume that selfishness entails causing suffering to others in order to please oneself. But in truth, if someone feels bad because you decide to line up with your joy, it just means that they are disconnected with themselves and are trying to victimize you for their happiness. Also, exploitation of any form comes from a hate-based vibration within, and a person who is aligned with his or her joy does not ever vibrate in hate. It's people who try to act selfless that are usually passive-aggressive within and carry a victim mentality. They are usually rooted in low self-esteem and try to compensate for it by getting approval from others by trying to please them. In truth, they're just not self-loving enough to align with their own joy, and so it's easy for them to sacrifice their joy for others. There's nothing really noble about it. Such people are quick to point out it's bad to align selfishly with one's joy because they feel guilty within of orienting with their own joy. To orient with one's own joy is a highly positive behavior, and it always attracts a reality of abundance and well-being towards such a person. The mindset of a victim behavior. A person who is a people pleaser is always rooted in a victim behavior, and if you ask him or her, they would tell you their victim story quite freely. They would tell you how ungrateful people are. They would tell you about how much they've tried to give pleasure to others, but were never reciprocated in the same way. They complain about the unfairness in this world. They would wallow in self-pity. They would tell you of their failed relationships where they sacrificed their happiness to please their partner who never seemed appreciative of it. They would tell you how they always get cheated on and how they're used by others. They fail to realize that they're attracting such realities onto themselves because they're disconnected from their own self and are trying to compensate for this disconnection by seeking love or approval outside them. If you try to please others while sacrificing your own joy, you will live out a life of feeling victimized and exploited, because that's the only reality you can attract from such a vibrational standpoint. It's not your job to make others happy. It's their job to find their happiness. Your job is to align with your happiness. Only when you're aligned with your happiness can you be an expression of happiness into this world. This is what true benevolence is all about. You can never bring benevolence into this world by focusing on making others happy while denying your own happiness. If you're not happy, you really have nothing to give this world anyway, because you will only be perpetuating your unhappiness into this world. It's totally okay to give pleasure to others if doing so gives pleasure to you, but just make sure you're not hiding under the cloak denial where you're trying to please others at the cost of your own happiness. Being oriented to your joy does not entail exploiting others. A person who is truly in love with him or herself would never seek to exploit someone else, because an inner love always manifests as outer love. It's only a person who feels fear or hatred within that tries to exploit others under the false hope that he or she would somehow be well off from it. Your joy is not dependent on exploiting others. Your joy will come forth in abundance from the universe if you line up with it. You don't have to make someone poor in order for you to be rich. That's just a highly naive and misplaced thinking based in lack and hate. Richness in every aspect and form will come forth from this universe once you line up with your joy in a simple state of self-love. The paradox is that when you become selfishly oriented towards your own happiness and joy, you automatically become a source of joy for others. The abundance that you attract from this place of joy is something that everyone around you can share in. But this abundance can't come forth if you're not oriented towards your joy in the first place. Orient yourself towards pleasing yourself first instead of focusing on pleasing others. Align with your interest first instead of looking to fulfill others' interests. If you are not lined up with yourself, you can never bring forth your natural expression into this world, and thus would never feel successful or fulfilled within you. A lot of people try to give the example of Mother Teresa to defend the behavior of sacrifice. It's important to have a clear perspective on this. Mother Teresa helped the impoverished children because she found joy in it. This was the work that brought her joy, and so she immersed herself in it. She was not sacrificing herself, but rather expressing her joy and living her joy through her work. One just had to look at her to know that she truly felt joyful about what she was doing, and there was no sense of sacrifice in her. Stop using her as an example to defend sacrificing your happiness for others, because it would be a misplaced interpretation on your part. Do what brings joy to you. Don't do something just to please others. It can be challenging to orient with your joy if you've been brought up in a mindset of sacrifice. But this is a negative mindset that you need to let go of to allow a deeper alignment with yourself.